Hi there. Welcome to this week's episode of Leadership Synergized, where we talk about leadership, but life, and that can be in the professional manner, the personal manner, but in particular, just love the opportunity that we take here through this medium and to present to you individuals who have been there, done that in many ways for success and significance. And this week, I'm very pleased to introduce a very dear friend of mine, Mr. Matt Malin, who has spent a lifetime in education, both in the public school sector as a classroom instructor, an athletic coach, a building administrator, but also a gentleman who served God his entire life and serves as a pastor of a small church located in the southwestern part of southern Indiana. Matt, my friend, thank you for being here today.
And sharing some things about leadership with you today.
It's my honor, my friend, that you would take the time today. Matt, just take a moment and introduce Matt Malin. You got that Detroit Tiger sign behind you, so that's an immediate call that says this is a Michigander type thing or a Wolverine. Go ahead and introduce Matt.
Yeah. I was born in Flint, Michigan many years ago now and lived there for just a little bit. And fortunately, my family came to Oakland City, Indiana. My dad, a non-traditional student, was in the business world and decided he wanted to go into teaching and pastoring, and ended up coming to Oakland City because his dad and father-in-law, who had passed, were General Baptist ministers. So he led him to Oakland City College at that time. Ended up living here for a while, moving back to Michigan, where my dad pastored. And then dad came back to the university and was on faculty here for roughly 25 to 30 years before his unexpected passing. So yeah, I'm really a Hoosier, but I still have a lot of connections in Michigan, a lot of family, and the Wolverine blood didn't quite get out of me. So I'm a big sports fan, and of course, the Michigan Wolverines and Detroit Tigers and Lions, and even the lowly Pistons, I cheer for them. Yeah, that's my background. And again, I've been in education, or was in education, for 31 years of public school. Been pastoring for nearly 35 years. Just recently retired and have spent the past year at Oakland City University with the School of Education, and it's just been a wonderful experience for me. So that's a little bit about me. I've got a wonderful wife of almost 35 years in a few weeks, and two kids, both married, both educators, and then have 4 grandchildren. It's a good life. For sure.
It's a great life, right?
Yeah.
It's really summed up by simply being blessed. But you talked about your 31 years in education. A lot of those years spent in the same school corporation, the same building as your wife. That had to be a fantastic experience for the two of you.
Yeah, it's always nice when you can work with family and friends, and that's what it was. And so I had a great experience. I was in the East Gibson School Corporation for my entire 31 years, as you said, as a teacher, as a coach, as an administrator, and it was a great experience for me. And my wife was in the same system. We had a lot of great conversations. She was a very good person for me to be a sounding board, but also give me some great insight in as an administrator what teachers were thinking, and not just mine, but across the district. Yeah, it was a blessing, no doubt about that.
Mr. Boleyn, between the classroom as an educator and administrator, what's the breakdown of those 31 years?
You mean as far as years service?
Yes.
Yeah, so I was in the classroom for 20 years, mainly at the high school level. But then was 11 years, a little over 11 years. I was a building administrator at the elementary level. So it was quite an adjustment, learning some new things, and was excited about the opportunity, and grew to love the elementary level. So I had experience at not only elementary, but secondary, taught in the junior high 4 or 5 years as part of that. Got to get experience every grade level, and that was exciting.
Was it always your pathway to serve as an administrator, or did that come about serendipitously?
When I did my master's work, I did in education with an emphasis on administration. I was prior to Oakland City even starting the program, so I went to Indiana State University and studied there, and ended up coming back, and for a good while didn't get into administration. Loved the classroom, stayed there, was coaching, doing lots of things, and then ended up getting an opportunity with some shuffling around, and they asked me to do an interim. And I did. And then shortly thereafter, I did about last 3 months of school. And then the next year was hired in as the full time, and spent over 11 years doing that.
When you mentioned a moment ago that roughly right at a year ago at this time, you were at that point of going through retirement from the public school educational system to move to the college level. Oakland City University, as you mentioned, is located in Oakland City, Indiana. It's a small college university founded by the General Baptists in the late 1800s in that regard. Offers a number of degrees from education, business, seminary, arts and sciences in that regard. Talk a bit, Mr. Malin, on that process you use that basically said, Matt, this is the time to make a move.
I think we all get to a point where we look for new challenges and new things to do in our lives. And I think I was at that point. I was very looking back. I can tell you that it was a great situation for me. The school that I was in had a great relationship with my staff. Things were going well. I was seeing improvement, and we were a school system, or let me back up, I should say a school that was about 65% of our kids were free and reduced, which isn't near what maybe a big city would have, but for our area, that was a pretty large amount of students that came from underprivileged situations. And so we had a lot to deal with, and we had some struggles, but we were pulling ourselves out of that and doing well. But I think I was looking for maybe something new and different. And the opportunity came about here at Oakland City University. And I decided, hey, if God's willing and the Lord's willing, let's approach this. And fortunately, I was able to receive the position, accepted it, and then went through the retirement process. But all was good where I was, and I enjoyed it. And I figured if the Lord didn't want it to be, then I would stay right where I was at, work a few more years, and then continue to look for new opportunities, whatever they may have been.
Thank you for sharing that. Certainly, in 31 years of education, there's been a lot of change take place in that regard. Talk a little bit when you think about the public education system that you began in. Sounds like 31 years, the 1990s in that general area versus where it was at in the 2023s when you left public education.
Yeah. It was yeah, and a lot of people may not agree with this statement, Dr. Smith, but kids are kids have been kids forever. And I don't really think kids have changed much. I think the system has changed. Unfortunately, there's been some things that maybe have changed that made it more difficult for administrators, educators, and that, whether it be implementation of new programs, curriculum, those kind of things. But I think kids are kids, and kids are always what we hold them to, and holding them accountable. And that when I was in school through the 70s and 80s, kids were goofing off and acting silly just as they are in 2023 when I left. Now, I think some people would probably say kids are just way different. They say things or do things now, but I think it's what we hold them accountable to. And so yeah, there's been a lot of changes, a lot more requirements. Probably the thing that I will tell you that my teachers disliked the most was all of the videos that I asked them to watch at the beginning of the year, things that they had to do for the requirements from the state. But overall, I think kids haven't really changed a whole lot, but unfortunately, the system has changed a little bit with so many requirements and so many expectations. And unfortunately, we've allowed maybe sometimes our kids to rule us a little bit, rule the roost a little bit. And fortunately, we have to try to take care of that at the school system and be mom and dad and grandma and grandpa and teacher, and the list goes on and on of what we have to be. So that's the things I see through the years that have happened.
I know one aspect that you and I have talked off camera many times about is in the 1990s when schools had an opening, you would get dozens and maybe even hundreds of applicants. In the 2020s, sometimes you're lucky if you get one for a position. In particular, you mentioned East Gibson School Corporation, a small rural system of under 1,000 students. It's really a challenge in today's educational world to fill positions with certified individuals, qualified individuals in those small rural areas. Talk a little bit about your perspective there and how that shifted in the past decade or two.
Wow, even in the 11 years that I was principal, it shifted greatly. And you're well aware of that, being an administrator yourself in the past. And gosh, you're right. I would get 10, 15, 20 applicants. I remember my very first year in our corporation, we had 6 openings. So we did our interviews together, and we probably interviewed 25 people. And the last few years, I was really scrambling to try to find people to apply and to be there, to come for interviews. It was really difficult. Like many school systems, we hired people on emergency permits. We hired people into special education positions that were general ed teachers that were going to pursue their degree in special ed. But yeah, it's really changed from that standpoint. And my hope and prayer is that we can develop and get some people out there that want have that passion and that love for kids. And that's what it's about. And it was really a struggle for me from time to just especially like you said in a rural small district. It's tough. And unfortunately our salaries and package that we could offer sometimes just wasn't enough, and it became almost a bidding type of war and game to try to get people to come and be a part.
One of the things you mentioned there, you talked about the financial packages can be so different between the smaller schools and the larger schools, as an example. Not good or bad, it's just the way the system works in that regard. Yes, that's a barrier to getting qualified applicants. But I would also believe and tend, if we just look at life's trends throughout at least my 6 decades, almost 7 decades, that there's typically more than one barrier. But the one or more than one variable, I should say, more than one barrier getting in the way. I have to wonder how much all the social media aspects play into individuals coming into the profession of an educator today. I have to wonder about how much the extrinsic motivation is outweighing intrinsic motivation and serving. Exactly to your point, right? And look, you've been a wonderful pastor for, as you said, more than 30 years with a family, a father and a grandfather in that regard. I know you're highly respected, not only in your community, but with everyone who's had a chance to be blessed to have you in their presence.
Thank you.
But I do wonder that while children are children, they're always going to be, where are we missing some intrinsic motivation to bring the love on behalf and let those children love back? And I also look from an athletic coach aspect when I go back to the 1960s and 70s and the coaches who jumped out at me, people that I looked at as role models and tried to emulate and learn from, man, they would put the time and effort in. And I'm not saying individuals don't do that today, but I think today's generation has learned from maybe where my generation put too much time away from family in that regard. And they're not necessarily willing to spend a lifetime in that setting today. Not that they're not willing to do what needs to be done, because they certainly are. And there are those successes, but there just seems to be a number of variables at play right now. And I'm not one that believes it won't ever right size itself. I think it will. Will it ever go back to where it was 40, 50 years ago? I don't think it will, but it'll right size itself to where it needs to be. I'd just be interested in your thoughts on the other variables besides just that financial package that may have been at play these last 10, 20 years.
Social media. All you have to do is get on social media or listen to the news, and there's always talks of frustrations with teachers, school systems, problems. And those things were going on years ago. And what I mean by that is those frustrations were there, but now they're magnified because you've got it right at your fingertips access to finding out about what's going on over here and there. And so I totally agree with you there. I think that's been a big factor in it, just the mentality of people toward the profession. And I think that's caused a lot of young people to stray away from it and say, number one, you don't get paid a lot, for it. You're not going to get rich from it. But also, then I've got to deal with these things that, and I've hired kids in that have been young, not only from Oakland City University, but from other universities locally here. And that was one of the biggest things. They were so scared of, I don't want to say messing up, but doing something wrong that might cause a parent or myself or another administrator to be upset with them. And they were so nervous about that because I think that's the world they've grown up in and lived in and seen. And I just told them, I used to always just tell them, just do your job, do the best you can, and love the kids, and that'll come back. So I think there are some variables out there that have hindered the education profession, and hopefully we can get beyond those. And I think sometimes, maybe right or wrong, Dr. Smith, and maybe sometimes we have people making decisions at the state levels and more that's really may not have a really good clue of what's going on in the classroom sometimes. And that's no disrespect to them. I know they're busy and they have a lot of time dealing with lots of things, but man, when we're getting so much legislation and different things that are coming about, for teachers and educators and school systems. You want to really share with those people, hey, this is what's going on, and here's how we can improve and be better. And so maybe that'll come one day. We'll see.
And you also have to wonder in that aspect, again, not being critical. God bless those who serve in those positions in that setting. Much respect there. But you also have to look at it from the standpoint that it's not as simple as putting a knife in the peanut butter and spreading it evenly across the piece of bread. What
Yeah,
may make sense in this level or type of school may not make sense in another in
that's
that
exactly
setting.
right.
And sometimes that gets lost in the deck of cards that gets shuffled with the constant change. And I know to your point, I've had instructors, administrators tell me that in particular, post COVID, the stress level, the emotional impact that is draining a lot of our educators, administrators, and teachers today. Many times they don't sense the stability because things continue to change, and the knowledge or understanding about why that change is needed and exactly how it's to work doesn't really get to them the way
Yeah,
they would
that's right.
really need to have it to buy into it in that setting.
Yeah. I agree 100%. And and unfortunately, and that was one of the issues for me as an administrator. Exactly what you mentioned was so many changes were coming and things were happening, and the teachers, were scrambling to find information and to be able to share with them. And that became a frustrating part for me to say, guys, I just don't know the answer right now. I'm sorry. I wish I did. I'll try to find it. But I think that's the frustrating part for teachers. There's change after change. And they're okay, why are these changes happening? But they sometimes don't always get the answer. And maybe it's not the answer they want, but even if we did have an answer, sometimes that helps.
Matt, I appreciate your time being here with us, and you're going to stick around for next week's episode as well.
Yeah, be great. Glad to.
I want to continue the discussion and again go back and talk about the balancing of the pastor focus and role and the educator focus and role. I think there's a lot of interesting knowledge from a leadership piece, and certainly a lot of interesting experiences you've had that our listeners and viewers would gain a lot from. God bless you, my friend. I love you, my brother, and I appreciate you being here.
Same here. Appreciate it very much. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for watching. For Mr. Malin, I'm Kevin Smith. Again, life isn't meant to be a constant rush. Sometimes we simply need still to be able to move forward consistently, constantly, and to build a life of significance for others. God bless you for watching. Have a great day.